The alarm on my wrist device buzzed 3 times before I even opened my eyes, and I knew that sound meant someone needed me right now. Not in an hour, not after breakfast, right now. I am Ethan Vale, a human working as a logistics officer on a trade station far from Earth, and I have learned that when an alien comes looking for a human in the middle of the night, it is never a small problem. I opened my door and found a woman standing there, her skin a dull bronze color, her eyes wide and wet, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the small device she was carrying. Her name was Sael, and she was from a species called the Vec, traders who almost never asked outsiders for anything, because asking meant admitting you had failed to solve your own problem. She did not waste time on greetings. She told me her daughter had been taken by a debt collection group working for the ruling empire of this region, and that her daughter would soon be listed as labor property instead of a living person, and once that happened, there would be no way to bring her back. She said she had gone to 3 courts, 2 councils, and 1 embassy, and every single one of them had told her the same thing, that she must wait, that procedures must be followed, that patience was required. I asked her how much time she had left before the papers were finalized, and she said, 11 days. 11 days is nothing when you are dealing with governments that measure their patience in years, but 11 days is an entire lifetime to someone who grew up on a planet where every second matters. I told her to sit down, and I told her I would help her, and I want to be honest that in that moment, I had no plan at all, only a feeling that I could not let another parent lose a child to a stack of unread documents. The first thing I did was call a friend named Grace, a records clerk who worked 3 levels below me and who had once told me she found human paperwork boring because it was too easy to break. Grace listened to the story without interrupting, and when I finished, she said one sentence that changed everything. She said that the Empire's courts were slow because nobody ever forced them to be fast, and that maybe it was time somebody did. Together we found a rule buried deep in the Empire's legal code, a rule that said any pending transfer of a person into the labor registry could be paused if an official injunction was filed in the jurisdiction where the transport ship would pass. The transport carrying Sael's daughter was scheduled to cross through 9 different systems before reaching its final stop, and each of those systems had its own local court, its own local magistrate, and its own slow-moving process. So Grace and I filed not one injunction but many, one for each system on the route, each one small, each one boring, each one designed to force a local official to physically check the ship before it could continue. Alien bureaucracies were never built to handle someone moving quickly through every gap at once, because nobody had ever tried to move that quickly before. While the injunctions were still crawling through their approval process, I made a harder decision, and I told Sael I would go to the transit station myself, ahead of the paperwork, because waiting for permission would take longer than the time we had left. She asked me why a stranger would risk so much for someone he had just met, and I told her that where I come from, we do not wait for permission to help someone who is drowning. I used every credit I had saved and every favor I had earned over 6 years of service to charter a small courier ship, and within a day, I was standing on a transit station 4 hours ahead of the fastest injunction that could possibly reach it. By the Empire's own law, I had no authority to stop anything yet, because the paperwork had not caught up to me, and everyone at that station knew it. I found the docking bay where the transport was scheduled to arrive, and I planted myself near the entrance, holding a copy of the Empire's own transparency statute, a rule that said any person could request to see a labor manifest if they had an active petition filed anywhere in the system. A tall officer named Rennick approached me and asked what business a human had standing in a restricted area, and I told him calmly that I was there to inspect a manifest under a citizen's petition right, and I handed him the statute number instead of arguing. He did not know the rule well enough to say I was wrong, so he called someone above him, and that person did not know either, and while they argued among themselves, I simply stood there, calm, polite, and unmoving. Word spread through the station that a human was refusing to leave the docking area, and more officers arrived, each one less certain than the last about what law actually applied to my situation. I recorded every conversation on a small device Grace had given me before I left, because I knew that confusion recorded on camera was more powerful than any argument I could make with my voice alone. 6 different officers gave 6 different answers about whether I had the right to be there, and every single contradiction was saved, time-stamped, and impossible to erase. By the time a senior official finally arrived who actually understood the statute, my very first injunction had cleared its approval process in a nearby system, and that alone was enough to legally freeze the transport where it stood. Sale's daughter, a young woman named Vera, stepped off that transport still confused about why the ship had suddenly stopped moving, not knowing that outside, on a cold metal platform, a stranger from another planet had spent the entire day refusing to walk away. The Empire's officials were furious, not because I had broken any law, since 3 separate reviews later confirmed I had not, but because I had shown every frightened parent watching from a distance exactly how thin their slow-moving walls really were. News of what happened moved through trading circles faster than any government report could travel, and soon it was not just Vec families whispering about it, but traders from other species too, all repeating the same simple idea that humans do not wait. Within a month, 3 more families reached out to me, each one facing a different version of the same problem. A slow system built to exhaust people until they gave up asking questions. I could not save everyone, and I want to be honest about that, because some cases were too far gone before I ever heard about them, and that weighed on me more than I expected it to. But for the ones I could reach in time, the method stayed mostly the same. Learn the rules better than the people enforcing them, move faster than the system expects, and never let confusion become an excuse for delay. The Empire eventually changed its own law, adding a required 2-week waiting period before any citizen could act on an emergency petition, and government officials called it a necessary correction to prevent, in their words, disruptive behavior. They never said my name in that announcement, but everyone on that station knew exactly why the rule had changed, and some of them even laughed quietly about it when they thought no officials were listening. Grace told me later that the real fear was never about one human standing in a doorway. The real fear was about thousands of quiet, patient, rule-following people finally realizing that the doorway could be opened if someone simply refused to wait outside it forever. Sael came to see me before I returned to my regular duties, and she brought Vera with her, thinner than before, quieter than before, but alive and standing on her own feet. Sael took my hand in both of hers, which I later learned was something her people almost never did with outsiders, and she said that she finally understood why humans were spoken about so differently from every other species in this part of space. She said, "You people do not wait," and I told her that where I come from, waiting too long has cost us too much in the past, so we learned a long time ago never to let it happen again. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I will never forget. She said that sentence sounded like both a gift and a warning at the same time. Maybe she was right. I did not set out to frighten an empire. I only wanted to help one mother find her daughter before a stack of documents made that impossible. But sometimes, the smallest act of refusing to wait can shake something much larger than you ever intended. And if there is one thing I learned from those 11 days, it is this. Patience has its place. But when someone is drowning in a system built to slow everything down, sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply refuse to stop moving.